friendship that'll never ever end.
Run!
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Reaction Beanie Yo 578. That in the neighborhood. My brothers and sisters, if you have not checked out that live stream that I did yesterday with Jose Ortiz from Evil Intentions, make sure y'all go check that out, man. I had such an amazing and just fun time interviewing him. And it's like, I'm just going to keep it real with y'all, Bean Team. I'll keep it real with y'all. The whole time I'm up there interviewing him, it felt kind of like freaking surreal. You know what I'm saying? I was like having a surreal moment. Like, holy F. I'm sitting up here interviewing Jose Ortiz from Evil Intentions. Like, these guys that I react to, I really do look up to them, man. Like, I really do look at them like the big dogs. And when I say big dogs, I mean big dogs, because Jose Ortiz from Evil Intention got 279,000 subscribers. You know what I'm saying, man? And we sitting over here at like 2.6 something K subscribers. So it was just freaking surreal, man. I enjoyed myself. And I just say one more time, shout out to Jose Ortiz for doing that with me. And I'll say this one more time, Bean Team. If you have not seen it yet, go check that out when you get a chance. But I digress, because today it is Sunday, and y'all know that we about to go back to the man. We about to go back to the myth. We about to go back to the legend, MrBallen. MrBallen Sundays, y'all. And the title of the video is "The World's Most Dangerous Cemetery Has Been Hurting People for 400 Years. That sounds like a very interesting title, MrBallen. And the thing that gets me the most in the title is the part about hurting people for 400 years. Like, do y'all know how long 400 years is, Bean Team? Like, it's so long. That time frame is so long to the human brain can't even really fathom that amount of time. You know what I'm saying, man? I don't freaking know, y'all. This is gonna be a great MrBallen right here. I already can feel it. I can feel it in my mind. I can feel it in my body. I can feel it in my soul. And we're about to check it out. But before we check it out, y'all know what y'all got to do. Get whatever you might need. Get what you need, please. We are back to the man, the myth, the legend, MrBallen. Y'all got what y'all need. Y'all ready to go? Then let's go.
Today's video is a classic scary story. It's about a group of people in Scotland who go into this infamous cemetery in the middle of the night, and they encounter something very bizarre, and amazingly, they actually manage to get a photo of it. And so if you stick around till the end of this video, you will see that photo. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please ask the like button if you can quickly use their cell phone to just make a simple quick call to your parents, and then as soon as they hand it over, immediately factory reset it and throw it off a cliff. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. Late one night in November of 1999, a 66-year-old minister named Colin Grant opened up the iron gates of a cemetery called Greyfriars Kirkyard This cemetery was one of the oldest and most famous cemeteries in Edinburgh, Scotland. Now, the cemetery was basically pitch black. However, there were a few old iron lanterns that lined the cobblestone path that cut through the cemetery. And so Colin pushed open these big gates and he stepped onto this path and he began walking. And on either side of him, for as far as he could see, were all these headstones, some of which dated back to the 1600s. And as he kept walking, he could see up ahead, even in the darkness, the huge Gothic-style church that sat right in the center of the cemetery. Now, at first glance, this cemetery just kind of looked like a pretty typical old cemetery, albeit a pretty spooky one. But to Colin, he knew there was far more than just a graveyard here. Deep underground in this cemetery, below where all the people have been buried at their headstones, was basically another cemetery. There was like this mass burial pit that the cemetery had been built on top of. And in this lower level cemetery, which in no way was marked, I mean, this is basically a hidden mass burial, were thousands of people who had been starved and tortured to death hundreds of years ago. And so Colin stopped for a second on the path and just kind of stared ahead at this church. And for a second, he thought about just turning and leaving because he did not want to be here. He was really only here because the city had begged him to come here. Colin, in addition to being a minister, claimed to be a psychic, which meant he could speak to the dead. And so the city, in desperation, had asked him to come to this cemetery tonight and perform an exorcism. And so as much as Colin did just want to turn around and leave, he knew he really had a duty here, not just to the city, but really to the people of the city. Because if he didn't do this exorcism, there was a good chance more people were going to get hurt.
I wonder what MrBallen mean by more people gonna get hurt. Like, why are these people begging for this man to come to this cemetery and do this exorcism? You know what I'm saying? But this cemetery is like a cemetery times 10, y'all. Like, this is a cemetery on another level because they got bodies that was here freaking 400 years ago, man. Just the fact that some of the tombstones have dates in the 1600s. Like, this is so freaking crazy, man. Like, I'll just put it to y'all this way. Where I live, there's no cemeteries that got people bodies that go back to the 1600s. You know what I'm saying? And then on top of that, underground, they got bodies that probably go back farther than that. This is crazy. Let's find out why these people want this man to come here and do this exorcism, though.
The only thing that was making Colin a little bit less afraid in this moment was he actually was not alone in the cemetery. There were two people with him. There was a journalist and a photographer from a local newspaper who were basically tagging along to document this exorcism. And so after taking a minute to compose himself, Colin continued walking deeper into the cemetery with these two following behind him. And then before reaching the big church, Colin left the path and began cutting through the grass, passing by different headstones, on the way to perhaps the most infamous building in the entire cemetery, the Black Mausoleum. The Black Mausoleum was this tall stone crypt with a rounded top that had been built sometime in the late 1600s. And as Colin got closer to this pretty creepy looking building that sat basically on the side of the cemetery, Colin began to feel this really intense sense of dread come over him. And the closer he got, that dread began to kind of manifest itself in like a pit in his stomach. And eventually he began feeling really scared of this building. And eventually Colin actually had to fully stop about 10 or so feet away from the building because he just felt like he couldn't go any closer. It felt evil. And then Colin turned and looked at his companions, the journalist and photographer, to see if maybe they were reacting to this mausoleum, but the two of them were just standing there with blank expressions on their face, like obviously not thinking that anything sinister was happening here. You know, even though the city had asked the minister to be here to perform this exorcism in this mausoleum, you know, it didn't mean everybody believed what was going on here, and clearly these two didn't. They were totally skeptical. But this didn't offend Colin. He was used to people not believing in the things he believed in. And he knew as soon as he actually began his work, you know, doing this exorcism, they would change their mind. And so at some point, Colin told the photographer that, hey, you know, I'm gonna go in the mausoleum now because I have to do the exorcism. Before I do, take a picture of the mausoleum. And so the photographer just raised her camera and took a picture of the mausoleum. Colin thanked her, and then he turned and began walking towards the building. And when he got...
I just gotta point out real quick, y'all. I'm just not realizing how crazy the thought of somebody doing an exorcism in a cemetery is, man. Think about it, y'all. From all the exorcism and stuff I've seen, it always happened at someone's home. More specifically, most of the time in the bedroom of the child that need to be exorcised. And I know that's not the word. Fuck y'all, because I know some of y'all laughing at me, man. But you know what I'm saying, man. Like, I ain't never heard of an exorcism happening in a cemetery. And out of all the cemeteries that this man gotta do this exorcism in, it's gotta be this one. Like, this is crazy, man.
Right in front of it, he looked up and he read the name across the top of the crypt. And it said George Mackenzie. And as Colin read that, he could feel his heart rate start to spike. So back in the late 1600s, George Mackenzie was a Scottish lord who worked for the King of England, enforcing the king's religious laws. But at the time, these laws were very unpopular. And there was one group called the Covenanters who hated these laws so much that they actually mounted a full-scale rebellion in 1679. But their rebellion failed miserably, and this is when George Mackenzie came in. He captured over 1,000 Covenanters, and he marched them all into this huge field, which would later become the Greyfriars Kirkyard Cemetery, but at the time it was just a big open field, and he held them there, and for weeks he had these people starved and tortured and mutilated, and if anybody tried to run or resist, because they knew they were doomed, I mean, they all knew they were gonna die here, if anybody took off, he would capture them, cut their head off, and then place their head on a spike around the perimeter of this field. Until, after several weeks, the entire field is just ringed with decaying bodies and bloody heads on spikes. And so after a few months of this, basically everybody in that field had been murdered in some horrible way by George Mackenzie. And their bodies were all dumped into a mass grave in Greyfriars Kirkyard and covered over, and then, hundreds of years later, a proper cemetery would be built right on top of that mass grave. And then, when George Mackenzie died later on, I mean, he lived a normal, happy, full life after doing all these horrible things, they built him this beautiful mausoleum in Greyfriars Kirkyard. And so here's this horrible person, George Mackenzie, who's a mass murderer, and he's put to rest in this beautiful mausoleum, just, feet away from this mass grave of all these people he killed.
That is fucking crazy, man. That is some crazy-ish, y'all. This man killed thousands, not even just killed, tortured. And let me calm down. Let me try to not get too angry, being team. And then you heard MrBallen talking about how after he killed them, he placed their heads on spikes. And it made me think about The Walking Dead. Some of y'all may know what I'm talking about. When we seen the heads on the spikes in that one particular scene, I think it was like season 9 or season 10 or something. Like I said, if you know, you know. But he did all this terrible stuff to thousands of people. And their bodies are buried literally under his body. He lived a regular life after doing all that. And not only that, he got like a shrine. He got his own freaking building in the damn cemetery while all those people that he made suffer is just buried away on top of each other like they nothing. And he literally is on top of them. That is just terrible, man. That's so terrible, and it make me say what I always be saying, being team. I just hope in the afterlife people get what they really deserve. I know there's a God out there, and I hope whatever God got planned for us in the afterlife, people like that got the terrible plan. They got the worst plan. That man, no, he got to pay for that in some type of way.
Almost 300 years after Mackenzie was buried, Greyfriars Kirkyard was quiet. It was not considered a haunted place. That all changed, though, in 1998, so that was 1 year before Colin showed up to perform this exorcism. That year, in 1998, a homeless man broke into the Black Mausoleum, and he fell through the floor and landed in one of those mass burial pits of those people Mackenzie had killed. And apparently, basically right after this happened, visitors to the cemetery began reporting the same thing, that anytime they were in or near the Black Mausoleum, they'd get pushed or tugged on or scratched or burned or even strangled. I mean, people were coming out of the cemetery terrified. And so quickly, people in town began to speculate about, what was going on in the cemetery, and quickly a story began to circulate around town that maybe when that guy fell through the floor in the mausoleum, that had released George Mackenzie's evil spirit, and his spirit was responsible for all these attacks. And so it went on like this for about a year until finally this young woman was found outside of the Black Mausoleum, unconscious, looking like she'd been strangled, and when she came to, she had no memory of what happened, and so people assumed this had to be another attack by the spirit of George Mackenzie. And so by this point, the city was totally fed up with this, they didn't know what to do, and so they said, you know what, let's just try an exorcism. Let's have someone go into that mausoleum and literally confront the spirit of George Mackenzie and banish him, get him out of here and stop this madness. And so ultimately Colin was hired to perform this exorcism. Thank you to BetterHelp.
Shout out to MrBallen in his commercial, man. Better help. Shout out to MrBallen. This one right here got my eyes wide open, y'all. Like, this is very freaking interesting, man. Just the whole history of how we even get to this point of him carrying out this exorcism. It's like, whoa, dude. And I don't know how the freak this exorcism is about to go, my brothers and sisters. But we know that MrBallen is not done with the craziness. And oh, man, I just thought about this. Remember when he said earlier that they got a picture. It's some picture that's gonna shock the freaking F out of all us. You know what I'm saying, man? This has been a great one, y'all. This has most definitely been a great one. Let's go.
During sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month.
Let's go.
As Colin stood there, reading the name George Mackenzie and mentally preparing himself to go inside of this horrible place, he realized he just couldn't do it. This was too much. And so Colin is just standing there feeling totally stressed out. He's embarrassed. He feels like a coward. He has no idea what he's gonna say to the photographer and journalist who've literally come out here to document what he's gonna do, and now he's not gonna do it. But as Colin turned around to basically blurt out this really embarrassing news that, hey guys, we gotta leave, he realized he actually knew something else he could do that in many ways might actually be better than going into this mausoleum and doing an exorcism. And so without saying anything, Colin just turned and began speed walking over to this big field that was not too far away from the Black Mausoleum. And when he got there, he just began chanting prayers and walking in circles, flicking holy water, didn't explain anything he was doing to the journalist and the photographer who'd followed him over there and are just watching him like, what's going on here? They got no idea. He's not clarifying. And for hours, this is what he did. He just kind of paced in this field, just kind of doing what looked like stereotypical, exorcism type behavior. And that's what the journalist and the photographer assumed he was doing. And so as Colin did whatever he was doing in this field, the photographer, whose name was Susan Burrell, just began doing her job, again, thinking that he was doing the exorcism. And so she just started taking pictures of him. And then finally, around 2 a.m., so again, this has been hours of Colin doing this thing he's doing, Colin just abruptly stops and walks over to Susan and the journalist, and Colin looks horrible. He's totally haggard, his hair's all disheveled, he's sweating, he's pale, and his head is down, and he says to the two women, "I failed." He explained to them that his original intention was to go into the Black Mausoleum and confront George Mackenzie's spirit head on and banish him from the cemetery. However, he had had a change of heart at the door and decided to go this other route, which was to go to this big open field in the middle of the cemetery and attempt to free the spirits of all those Covenanters who had been tortured and killed by George Mackenzie. Colin's thinking was, if I can free all of these poor tortured souls, that maybe once they're gone, George Mackenzie's spirit will also go away. And while, according to Colin, he was able to free, 200 some odd trapped souls, he said there were many more that still needed to be freed, and he just didn't have the strength. Like, he couldn't do this right now. And so he said, I have to rest and do this at another time. Now, the journalist and the photographer were totally over this and did not care at all. It's 2 a.m., they don't really understand what he was doing, they don't really know if this was the exorcism or if it was something else, but to them, they're like, okay, fine, we'll get out of here, it's late, it's not a big deal. And so the three of them, they began walking out of the cemetery, and right when they got in front of the church, so basically between where the Black Mausoleum was and where that field was, where Colin had been for the past several hours, Colin abruptly stopped, and he told the journalist and the photographer that actually, you know what? He had a little strength left, and he felt like it was his duty to try this again, because he knew he could free more souls, and so he was going to give it another go.
And this when the craziness finna happen, man. He about to turn his ass back around and go back, and this time he may actually go into the mausoleum, man. But I can't even blame him for not wanting to go in there. Would y'all blame him being team? But this is what he have effed up at. Here come the plot twist.
And so the journalist and the photographer are like, okay. And so Colin, he gets out his Bible and he begins kind of doing the same thing he was doing out in the field, walking around, chanting Bible verses, spraying holy water all around. And then at some point, for reasons he did not explain to either Susan or the journalist, he pulled out 12 candles from his backpack that he had brought along, and he put them in a circle on the ground right in front of this church. It also encompassed this big Celtic cross that was on the ground. And Colin was inside of this circle, and he lit all these candles, and the whole time again, he's chanting out these Bible verses, and he stands up, and right after all the candles have been lit, suddenly Susan and the journalist noticed that the candles begin to flicker. And it's not windy at all inside the cemetery. Like, they shouldn't be flickering. And at the same time, Colin seemed to sense that something was happening around him, and he turned his whole body, his whole presence, and he looked over at the Black Mausoleum and began chanting these Bible verses louder and louder, like he was aiming them at the Black Mausoleum. And as he was doing this, the candles were flickering more and more and more, and at some point Colin actually picked up one of these candles and kind of held it out at the Black Mausoleum. And so at this point, the journalist and the photographer, Susan, they're sensing that something weird is happening here. Like, this is spooky what they're seeing. Like, why are the candles flickering? What's going on with Colin? Like, what's happening here? And for a minute, the two of them kind of abandoned their actual job, which is to document what they're seeing, and they just stood there kind of witnessing this totally bizarre event. But then Susan sort of broke out of it. She lifted up her camera, and right as Colin is passionately chanting out these verses, she takes a picture of him, and the second she does, the flash lights up the cemetery, and then after the flash goes away, Colin, it was like the light went out on him, and he just crumpled to the ground. And so the journalist immediately ran over to Colin to see if he was okay, and Colin, who's like barely conscious at this point, he just kept repeating, "This is going to kill me. This is going to kill me." And so Susan was about to run over and join her colleague and make sure Colin was okay, but before she did, she glanced down at her camera to see the picture she had taken of Colin right before he collapsed. And as she glanced at it, she couldn't believe what she was looking at. At first she thought, maybe this is some trick of the light, like this can't be right. But then she zoomed in on the photo, and when she looked closely, she screamed. Here's the photograph that Susan took. As you can see, Colin the minister is standing there with the candle outstretched, and behind him is the big church, and on the church, on the left side, there are windows. Now, this church was locked up. Nobody was inside the church at the time. But you can clearly see in the left window, there is a figure in that window looking out at Colin. Now, of course, this is not evidence enough to make everybody believe that, oh, that must be George Mackenzie's spirit staring out at Colin. He's the reason Colin collapsed. But I'll tell you, this photograph is not the end of the story. Remember, after Colin collapsed to the ground, after this photo was taken, the journalist ran over, and all Colin kept saying was, "This is gonna kill me, this is gonna kill me." Well, it would turn out he'd be right. Not long after this failed exorcism, Colin would die inexplicably. His death would come as a total shock to his friends and family. No one has ever been able to debunk the photo that Susan took that showed that dark figure in the window of the church, meaning nobody knows what that was. The church really was supposed to be empty and locked, and so how is there somebody or something in the window? Nobody knows.
I ain't gonna lie, y'all. Like, I can't even come up with a theory to try to debunk what the freak we saw in that window. What the freak was that? Like, seriously, man. Damn. Daddy, and then he died not too long later. Colin died.
A lot of people think that could be the evil spirit of George Mackenzie, striking Colin down, and Susan managed to capture it on film. But, it's up to you if you believe that or not. But I will say, to this day, people go into that cemetery and come out with scratch marks on them and, claiming they were pushed or pulled or strangled. And so that cemetery is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the world. And George Mackenzie's spirit, who supposedly haunts it, is considered to be one of the most dangerous poltergeists in the world as well. Before I became a
that is wild, man. Like I said, man, it's unexplainable what the freak was in that window, man. I don't know, y'all. I don't know. But I wouldn't be lying to y'all. And we talked about this earlier this week. I think it was when we was watching Mike from that chapter about how I would love to explore abandoned buildings and stuff like that. Go try to see if I can see any paranormal activity. I ain't gonna lie. I I ain't no probably. If I had the money, if I had the time, if I was able to, I would go to that cemetery, y'all. Seriously. But like I said, man, I'm not just going alone. And he didn't go alone, but he went with two people who was very spectacle, number one. And it was just two of them. It's going to be me and all y'all being team. Like, whoever want to go with me, we all going, man. And I'm going to bring my dog, too. I got to bring my dog with me, too. I got to bring my dog. My dog named Sweetie. I got to bring Sweetie with us, being team. We going to all go together, man. And I'm going to get bold. I'm just telling y'all how I am, man, when it comes to this spookiness stuff. I just love the spooky. I would, if I'm able to, I would walk inside that mausoleum. Now, I'm not mad at Colin for not wanting to do it, but just me personally, I would do it, man. But when I walk in, y'all got to goddamn keep the door open, man, and make sure I'm straight while I'm in there. You know what I'm saying? I don't know, man. I would just really enjoy doing what Colin did. But on a serious note, it's so freaking strange that, number one, what the freak was that in the window? And number two, why did he just inexplicably die a couple of days later? Like, what the freak, man? It's freaking strange, man. Paranormal activities are freaking strange. This is one of the most strangest, dark, deep, and mysterious what is going on type of cemeteries that I ever heard about. Just the fact that it not only had people who was buried in the new cemetery, so to speak, that date back to the 1600s. You got bodies down below, thousands of bodies piled down below the actual cemetery from a dude who freaking killed and tortured them, and his body is buried in his own little shrine, his own little room, little building. Like, the whole backstory is also crazy too, y'all. But this is just long story short story long, was another great MrBallen video. I knew when I read the title, man, I was like, this one right here is gonna be very freaking interesting. And that it was, being team. That it was. But I digress. I'm gonna go let y'all go now, man. I appreciate y'all coming on back as always. Make sure that y'all come back Tuesday, because I have been dying to watch the newest Lazy Man Masquerade video. He put it out like 2 days ago, and on Tuesday, y'all will finally see my reaction to that. And we just gonna keep this thing going, man. Make sure that y'all come on back next Saturday for our second live stream. We're gonna be doing that. And we just, like I just said right there, we gonna keep this thing going. And until then, my friends, I also need y'all to remember this. Love, peace, and happiness. Stay safe. Don't stop. Keep going. Yeah.